Hello, my name is Celia. I'm from the University of Warwick in the UK. And my talk is going to be about people like you. That is, I'm going to talk about the findings of a project on personalization called People Like You. But what do I mean by personalization? It can mean many things, but I'm using the term to refer to an address to you, an address that invites your participation, but leads to the making up of new categories, new types or kinds of person, people like you. The findings of our study suggest that these new types of person, people like you, contribute to new forms of stratification, of inequality and discrimination, as well as offering new opportunities for intervention and action, for recognition, identification, solidarity, and political activism. I'll start with some examples of the address to you. Invitations to identify, recognize, or name yourself. Although, as some of these examples show, these invitations don't always work out. Sometimes the address to you comes from a company, sometimes from the state. Sometimes the address comes from other people, strangers or friends, who assert an identity themselves, inviting you to recognize yourself, to say in turn, I am Charlie, je suis Charlie, or me too. However, while the address to you often appears as if it's addressed to you alone, as a unique, special individual, the purpose of the address is usually the creation of categories, types, or kinds of people. This means that the you, the I, and the me of personalization are simultaneously single and many, individual and collective. In our study, we found that these new categories emerge from the ways in which participants, your responses, your activities, are organized, tracked, and registered. Importantly, our study showed that these categories emerge from the ways in which practices of liking and making likeness or similarity are interrelated. People like you, like things, like this, is the phrase we use to capture the interrelationship of these categories. Liking can mean liking, tagging, or following in social media. It can mean the amount of time you spend on a specific web page. It can be your responses to an A/B website testing, or it can be your reactions to medical, pharmaceutical, or other interventions. Likeness, the making of likeness or similarity, on the other hand, is usually established not by something that you do, but through statistical and other algorithmic techniques. Often, the address to you, the invitation to participate, is designed to be ongoing, so as to provide continually updated personal data from you that can be folded back into the initial classification or typology on a repeated basis. And that means that personalized classifications, categories of people like you, are not as stable, not as fixed as previous kinds of categories of person, categories of gender or age or race. And these new categories can be almost infinitely adjusted as data collected for one purpose can be, and often is, repurposed. You can be put in and fall out of these categories without you necessarily knowing. So, what I'm saying is that with the rise of datafication, of machine learning and AI, constantly changing categories of people like you can now be rapidly created and tracked over time and across a huge range of data sets. And you can be optimized in relation to multiple different purposes, many of which you know nothing about and are not your own. So these new ways to make up kinds or types of people raise really important issues for who we think we are, for stratification, inequality, discrimination, for how we're treated by the state, by the government, and business. They're important for the accuracy of medical diagnosis and treatment, for predictions of likely future behavior, for employment opportunities, for access to credit, insurance, and for a sense of belonging in a community. So what I want to do now is to give you just a few examples to show some of the very diverse outcomes of personalization. My first example is from personalized or precision medicine. So with the possibility of collecting more and different kinds of health data more easily, it's become possible to identify, for example, cancers that like or respond to treatments in a similar way. And this has led to the creation of new medical taxonomies or classifications of cancer. It's become possible to identify more and more different kinds of, for example, breast cancer. And these more granular or precise cancer categories can also be more easily updated through personalization. So it's been found that cancers often evolve in response to treatments, with previously subdominant clones becoming dominant. So a particular cancer, whilst it might be sufficiently precisely identified so as to be able to predict a first effective treatment, may then be recategorized. There may be a second or third line treatment. In the UK, this kind of precision medicine has involved new kinds of collaboration between private companies, such as Google and Amazon, and the National Health Service, our public health service, and has involved a somewhat uneasy, and some have said somewhat unfair, exchange of personal data for algorithmic expertise. My second example comes from a study of a prototype recommendation app. This is a study that we conducted with colleagues from the Catholic University here in Santiago. Our aim was to explore the experience of using a recommendation app. So the prototype had features similar to the recommendation devices that are commonly encountered in everyday life, like Spotify or Netflix. But we also introduced other features to allow our participants, who were from both Chile and the UK, to reflect on that experience of recommendation devices with us. Now, nearly all the participants reported that they found the interaction with the app complicated their sense of identity of who they were. I'm sorry, you probably can't read that, but some participants disputed the accuracy of the recommendations they received from our prototype. They refused to recognize themselves. They questioned their inclusion in a category, disowning some of the personality characteristics they were ascribed while identifying with others. They drew lines between themselves and others. One said, "The app doesn't understand that she's my mum." Other participants asserted their membership of a group that they believed should automatically lead to inclusion in some of the app's categories, such as inclusion in the category "I like Latin music." The participant said, "I should be included. I am Latin." Other participants were led to query their identity itself. They replied by saying, "I think what's good about the app is that it pushes you to think about yourself. It pushes you to think, how do I stage myself?" I would just tell the organizers that my prompt is way behind what I'm trying to say to you. They could speed it up a little bit, that would help me. You need to go a bit further. You need to go a bit further, a bit faster, till we get to my third example, which comes from Facebook. Now, in the mid-2010s, Facebook created some new categories of people like you. They called these categories multicultural affinity groups. They were Asian, African American, and Hispanic. They said very clearly that these affinity groups were not related to race or ethnicity or genetic type. They were groups that were created depending on whether you liked products, activities, music associated with these cultural groupings. However, advertisers used those categories to target racial and ethnic groups. There were a number of legal cases. Facebook then revised their categories. They used a variety of proxies for these multicultural affinity groups. Nevertheless, advertisers still continued to discriminate between ethnic and racial groups. Facebook now say they don't allow the use of these new categories for particular purposes, for the purposes of residence credit and health. They may still be discriminatory, but that's the current situation. Now, what I hope I've shown with those three examples is that the outcomes of personalization are very different, can be very various. There is no single outcome. However, I think that the kinds of categories of people like you do share some characteristics. And I think those characteristics are really important for how we live together as a society. I think those shared characteristics pose questions for us, many questions. I'm just going to flag two. One relates to this notion of the individual. What I want to ask is, what does it mean that persons in categories of people like you are not individual, but individual. That is, what does it mean that while you may understand yourself to be an individual, a discrete, undivided self or subject, you are in fact being understood as what I would call a individual. That is, a relational, context-dependent self or subject who can be endlessly multiplied and divided according to purpose. This idea of the individual is complicated, I know, but I think it can be illustrated by reference to a phrase that is sometimes used to describe a married couple: man and wife. In this phrase, the man is and remains an individual, while on marriage, the woman becomes a individual. She is defined in relation to the man. She is his wife. It is almost as if she is his possession. So the findings of our study led us to ask, what does it mean that we are increasingly recognized by the state, by companies, and sometimes by each other as individuals, as constituted in relations of liking and likeness, rather than, or sometimes as well as, in terms of our socio-demographic identities, in terms of gender or age or ethnicity? So our findings lead us to ask, what are the new terms, not just of marriage, but also not just the marriage contract, but also the social contract that we make with society? My last question to you can be illustrated by reference to the examples of Je suis Charlie, Me Too, and Black Lives Matter. As these addresses to you were shared and become collectives of I's and me's, as we all know, they also provoked antagonistic responses, leading to the creation of what I would describe as many many's. Some of the responses call up an all, but what our study suggests is that it's become harder to locate a single all to which we all belong. It seems we don't yet know how to connect the many many's of personalization, a situation which, in my view, may help explain why we see a revived emphasis on sometimes exclusionary alls of race, nation, and territory. What we do with this situation, I want to suggest, is up to people like you. Thank you.